Tonight, the Prime Minister calls for unity among his colleagues while declaring he will not resign.
It's the people that hire, and frankly, it's the people that should fire.
Also ahead, confirmation 2 Australian drug smugglers will be part of Indonesia's next round of executions. Australian journalist Peter Grester homeward bound after 400 days in an Egyptian prison. And firefighters from Victoria rushed to Western Australia to relieve exhausted crews battling 4 major blazes. Good evening, Rachel Pupazzoni with ABC News. Those stories in a moment, but first tonight there are reports Adam Giles has been stripped of his role as Northern Territory Chief Minister. News outlets are reporting the member for Katherine, Willem Westra van Holth, is the new Chief Minister and John Elfrink is the new Deputy. We'll have more on that story as it develops. Tony Abbott is defying his critics within government with a warning that he's not quitting and that his colleagues don't have the right to topple him. But Mr Abbott hasn't silenced backbench critics, as political correspondent Greg Jennett reports.
Must be a big event, isn't it? I think it is.
He flipped the script, but Tony Abbott is not for flopping.
You elected us, you elected me to set Australia up for the long term. The Australian people rejected chaos, and we are not going to take them back to that chaos.
Down in the polls and with dejected members on benches front and back, it was time for one more leader's call.
It's the people that hire, and frankly, it's the people that should fire.
In other words, the Liberal Party room should never knock off a mid-term Prime Minister, even one who, by his own admission, has had a rough few months.
I like my colleagues, I respect my colleagues, I trust my colleagues, and the last thing any of them would want to do is to make a difficult situation worse.
He has ideas to try to make the situation better. No more captain's calls. Future knights and dames will be appointed by an independent panel.
But I have listened, I have learned, and I have acted.
The Tony Abbott of 2015 promises to listen much more, to consult colleagues and to funnel their policy ideas into cabinet. And when they tell him to ditch universal paid parental leave, he does.
What's desirable is not always doable, especially when times are tough and budgets are tight.
The point about it is not that he's ditched it, it's that you can't trust Tony Abbott to keep his word on anything.
A mother and baby.
The PPL that looked doable for almost 5 years has been undone within 2 months.
It is an absolute signature policy. It is going to be one of the defining marks of my leadership of the coalition.
Reality has bitten the Prime Minister's leadership and it's gnawing at government policies and tactics. Many of 2014's budget nasties will go, replaced by a childcare package, small business tax cuts and jobs policies, all with a new commitment that family budgets won't be slugged to pay for them. Bruising battles with Senate crossbenchers are to be avoided.
The reality is there is not much point arguing for a measure that has no chance.
The argument now is with backbench dissidents.
People have got to stop focusing on themselves as members of Parliament and start focusing on the people of Australia.
It is the job of everyone in government now to get on with the job.
As their leader puts it, they're all on a journey.
What do we do? Are you really? Yeah, really? Okay. All right.
Destination unknown. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
After more than a year languishing in a jail in Cairo, the Australian journalist Peter Grester is on his way home. But his family says he won't rest until his 2 colleagues from the Al Jazeera network are also set free. ABC correspondent Barbara Miller is in Cyprus, where Peter Grester has decided to stay for the moment before heading home to Australia.
It's morning here in Cyprus and Peter Grester has spent his first night of freedom in more than a year. He flew in here in the early evening local time last night. He's with his brother Mike. It's just about an hour's flight from Cairo, but I'm sure it feels like a world away. His brother Andrew in Brisbane has said that Peter's taking time here to gather his thoughts, to find his feet. We know he's already met with Australian consular officials and later he's meeting meeting with the head of Al Jazeera English, who's flying into Cyprus for a private meeting with Peter Greste. Now, both Al Jazeera and Peter Greste have been keen to say that what's really on their minds as they savour this freedom for Peter Greste is the fate of those other two colleagues still incarcerated in Cairo.
He's not going to forget his two other colleagues. There's no doubt that his excitement is tempered and restrained and will be until those guys are free.
We don't know when we'll hear from Peter Greste publicly for the first time. He'll be reflecting on those 400 days in captivity, how a routine assignment turned into this extraordinary situation. Peter Greste was and remains a highly respected reporter. He's covered some of the hot spots across the Middle East and Africa. But his incarceration has made him the story, and that'll be something he has to take in. The pressures on him in the coming weeks and months likely to be significant. So a lot to reflect on as Peter Greste enjoys this first full day of freedom.
Indonesia says Bali 9 ringleaders Andrew Chan and Miran Sukumaran will be in the next group of convicted criminals to face a firing squad. But no date has been set for their execution. Indonesia correspondent George Roberts has the latest.
Indonesia's been making a point of singling out drug smugglers and giving them its toughest penalty. Now the Attorney General's confirmed that 2 Australians will be among the next group to face a firing squad. Last month, 6 drug smugglers were executed by Indonesia. 2 Australians, Andrew Chan and Miran Sukumaran, have been on death row in Bali since 2006 for organising the so-called Bali 9 heroin trafficking group. The Attorney General says that they will now be among the next group to be put to death.
The first priority is the narcotics criminals. Other criminals will be considered next.
Chan and Sukumaran were recently denied presidential pardons. It's understood that on Australia Day this year, the Prime Minister Tony Abbott made another plea. He asked Indonesia's ambassador to Australia if there was anything that Australia could do to change that decision and save the 2 men. The ambassador, Najib Rapat-Kusuma, says that he told Mr Abbott that there was nothing left. All avenues had been exhausted and the situation was final.
An internal brawl is playing out in the Queensland LNP, destroying plans for a smooth transition to a new leadership team. Latest counting gives Labor a chance of ruling in its own right, but it may still need the support of 3 crossbench MPs.
Surrounded by his staff for possibly the last time and telling it like it is, Jeff Seeney is giving up his leadership role and delivering a full and frank assessment of Campbell Newman's advisors.
They weren't familiar with the accepted norms, and they weren't familiar with the processes.
And the privatisation plan.
We didn't get that mandate, so the question is gone. The question is gone completely.
But his opinion about the next LNP leader isn't shared by LNP headquarters. Mr Seeney believes a Tim Nicholls-Lawrence Springborg partnership would be wonderful. He wanted it decided at 10:30 Tuesday.
It's my role to call the elected members together, and I will exercise that role and call the elected members together tomorrow morning.
Others think a Nicholls-Springborg partnership would be anything but wonderful. As chaos descended, the meeting was cancelled. Via Twitter came the message from the caretaker premier who doesn't have a seat anymore. The party room meeting will be called when the outcome in seats still undecided is clear. The organisational wing is backing Fiona Simpson.
I may not have the support of the party room. I know I've got support of the broader poll in the electorate.
She cast carefully worded aspersions on Mr Nicholls.
Tim is a very capable man, and I think the concern has been that the leadership style of the leadership group is the reason that we're in this position.
One reason there's a push behind Miss Simpson is her rapport with the crossbenchers. It's clear Peter Wellington won't support the LNP if Mr Nicholls is in charge.
I certainly would have a real difficulty in supporting Tim Nicholls to continue in that key leadership position.
So would the Katter Party MPs.
We have concerns about negotiating with Tim Nicholls, but however, if they put whoever they put up, well, that's their decision now. But I've made that clear with those 3 leaders that they weren't good for Queensland.
The potential balance of power MPs will make the most of their bargaining chips with a list of priorities.
We're going to present those to the two major parties and they can tell us how that aligns with their policies.
But there's some history the LNP might regret.
We were treated like dirt, sent to the dungeons, had our party status removed, but we're much bigger than that at this present moment. We've moved on.
The LNP will hope so. Chris O'Brien, ABC News, Brisbane.
The Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse sat in Melbourne today to hear allegations senior members of Victoria's Orthodox Jewish community tried to cover up sexual assault allegations. Victims told the Commission they were abused while they were students at Yeshiva College in East St Kilda and were intimidated and ostracised by members of the community for daring to speak out.
Decades have passed since Manny Wax was abused by paedophile David Cyprus at the Yeshiva Centre in Melbourne. He's known for speaking out about child abuse in the Jewish Orthodox community, but today was special. He told his story to a Royal Commission.
For me, it's very difficult to believe that this day has finally come. It's an incredible day for justice, however belated that is.
In the witness box, Manny Wax detailed some of the taunts he'd received since going public.
That I'm a media whore, that I'm in it for the money, that my family and myself are all damaged.
Mr Wax now lives overseas, a result, he says, of ongoing intimidation.
What were the perceptions or experiences you had when you came to decide to leave the country?
If it was up to my wife, we would have left a long time ago.
Another of Cyprus's victims, known only as AVA, told the Commission the abuse had robbed him of his innocence, his childhood and his life. I kept quiet about my abuse because of the stigma, he said. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Yeshiva Centre and some of the rabbis knew about David's penchant for young boys. The Royal Commission will also examine the role of Masira, an ancient Jewish code of silence to counter persecution that prevents a Jewish person from informing on another. Manny Wax hopes this is the end of years of sleepless nights.
It's just an enormous weight lifted off my shoulders. It's been decades coming.
His father will give evidence tomorrow. Peter Carline, ABC News, Melbourne.
More than 130 firefighters from Victoria are heading to Western Australia to relieve exhausted crews battling 4 major blazes in southern parts of the state. Authorities say WA has seen an unprecedented number of fires this season and challenging conditions are set to continue this week.
A bushfire burning in Northcliffe in the Shire of Manjimup is about to enter its 4th day. There are reports one unoccupied farmhouse has been destroyed as the fire burned through 17,000 hectares.
We've still got a lot of work to do around these two sides of this fire.
It's one of 4 major fires burning in WA. The others are in Lower Hotham in the Shire of Boddington, the Helena National Park in the Shire of Beverley, and in Waroona, where a house and several sheds were destroyed over the weekend. It's not the severity of the fires that's surprised authorities, but the number of them. There have been 2,900 in Western Australia so far this year, pushing resources to the limits.
There is a time, and that time is now, to give our wonderful volunteers, career fire and rescue and firefighters right across the state a little bit of a respite for what has been a very, very challenging and busy period since Christmas.
137 firefighters from Victoria are en route to WA to help. While some will work in planning, logistics and support roles, most will be on the ground, but they'll be challenged by the weather. 120 fires have been caused by lightning strikes in the past week alone, and the Weather Bureau says the unstable conditions are set to continue.
We've had a large area of high pressure sitting in the Bight, and we've been seeing the conditions conducive to fire activity just basically sitting off the west coast. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not likely that these are going to change until Wednesday at the earliest.
Authorities are again pleading with residents to make sure their homes are bushfire ready. Charlotte Hamlin, ABC News.
Northern Territory Police have been given 3 months to compile forensic evidence in the case against 2 teenagers accused of murdering a popular Yuendumu youth worker late last week. The 18-year-old man and 16-year-old boy both made brief appearances in the Alice Springs courts this morning.
53-year-old Rick Berry was found dead in his Yuendumu home last week. 18-year-old Nelson Inkamala and a 16-year-old boy have been charged with his murder. The pair also face charges of stealing, arson and unauthorised use of a motor vehicle for allegedly taking the victim's car and torching it on the edge of the Tanami Desert. Mr Berry moved to Yuendumu in 2010 after leaving Scotch College in Melbourne, where he'd been the school's swimming coach. When he arrived in Yuendumu, he took up the role of pool manager and was heavily involved in a number of youth diversion programs. His body was found in his house just behind the pool on Thursday afternoon when community members went to find out why he didn't show up for work that day. The Central Land Council says the community remains calm. Mr Berry's former employer says the people of Yuendumu have rallied to mourn his death.
Every grandparent, every parent, every auntie and uncle, everybody knew Rick. And he had a warmth and a sense of humour that everybody really appreciated. He was constantly giving out.
In court, neither of the teenagers charged over Mr Berry's death applied for bail.
The case was adjourned for 3 months instead of the usual 6 weeks to give prosecutors the time they need to compile a case because of the need for complex forensic evidence.
Both teens are next due in court in April. Robert Herrick, ABC News, Alice Springs.
2 women are expected to be charged on summons over a court invasion during the men's final at the Australian Open tennis in Melbourne last night. The protesters say they were trying to highlight the plight of refugees at the Manus Island Detention Centre. Play was suspended for about 5 minutes and security guards surrounded Novak Djokovic and Andy Murray while 2 women were removed from the court. 6 other protesters were evicted from the stadium.
We wanted to create the greatest opportunity in order to get our message across about, what's going on, the torture and abuse that is happening in detention centres under Australian care.
On occasions we do have people like last night, what happened, and we will be reviewing. I'll be in deep and meaningful discussions with Tennis Australia to see what further can be done to prevent those sorts of things from happening again.
Police say a 28-year-old Brunswick West woman and a 32-year-old Brunswick East woman will be charged with disrupting play. Victoria Police have charged prominent harness racing identity Shane Cramp over alleged race fixing. They arrested Cramp, his father and 3 other men in raids on properties in Mildura and Melbourne. They've since charged both Cramp and his father but have released the 3 other men.
Known by some as the Mildura Master, Shane Cramp made headlines last year with this record-breaking performance. He became the first horseman to achieve a clean sweep of a meeting, training all 8 winners.
I went over the line and put my fist in the air and sort of saluted to the family and the crowd and everyone.
Today's arrests were the result of a 10-month investigation by the newly set up Sports Integrity Police Unit.
We had information that we'd been getting for some time about various races, and we felt that it got to the stage where we had enough to present the police to be able to investigate.
Police searched 4 properties in Mildura today and 1 in Melbourne. Shane Cramp and his father Greg and 3 other men were arrested. Police allege the syndicate corrupted the betting system by manipulating races.
What we've got here is a situation where people are alleged to have been manipulating outcomes of races and then also betting on those races.
Victoria's integrity and sport laws were introduced nearly 2 years ago and a special police unit set up to investigate corruption in sport. This is the first time it's targeted the racing industry. Cheryl Hall, ABC News.
And just to recap on our breaking story this evening, Adam Giles has been stripped of his role as the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory. His office has this evening confirmed this news. The member for Katherine, William Wester von Holth, is the new Chief Minister after winning the leadership challenge 8 votes to 6. John Elfrink is the new deputy. We'll have more on that later in the bulletin. The 19-year-old daughter of the late West Australian mining billionaire Michael Wright is contesting his will in the Supreme Court in Perth, claiming she's owed millions of dollars. Olivia Mead has been left with a $3 million trust fund, but says it's not enough to support her. Courtney Bembridge was in court.
Olivia Mead claims her late father didn't leave her enough money for her support, education and advancement in life. She's lodged a claim in the Supreme Court of WA contesting his will and seeking millions of dollars for property, furniture, pets and musical instruments. She was questioned about the items listed in her claim. They include a home worth 5 times the median house price in Perth, 2 cars and overseas and domestic holidays worth $50,000 a year. She's also seeking $800 a week to dine out at restaurants and $10,000 a year for handbags and accessories. Also in her claim, $250,000 for a Ritter bass guitar, the world's most expensive, and more than $1 million for a crystal-encrusted grand piano. The court heard the 19-year-old university student currently earns $35,000 a year. She repeatedly denied suggestions she was trying to inflate her claim to get more money. Mr. Wright died in 2012. He was the son of Peter Wright, the business partner of the late mining magnate Lang Hancock.
Some people have described it as looking like a giant brown paper bag. Now, world-renowned architect Frank Gehry has finally arrived in Sydney to see his landmark building, the new UTS Business School.
5 years from conception, Canadian architect Frank Gehry celebrates his latest creation.
We were looking for some way to humanise a building so it doesn't look like those, with all due respect.
He explained his design philosophy to the Governor-General and Dr Chow Chak Wing, whose name is on the building, after donating $20 million to the project.
Maybe it's a brown paper bag, but it is flexible on the inside. There's a lot of room for change and movement.
Mr Gehry says many of the learning spaces can evolve over time. Its main internal architectural feature is this crumpled mirrored staircase. So is the man who's designed some of the world's most spectacular buildings happy with his latest endeavour?
Oh boy. I'm Jewish and I feel guilty about everything. It takes me 2 years to come around. I see all the things I would change and want to change, and actually I wouldn't change.
A little more time touring the site leaves him relieved.
It's a lot of pride because they're acting like they like it.
As for the rest of Sydney's architecture, he believes the 19th century buildings are still the city's best, and he's not a fan of modern glass boxes.
Faceless, not friendly, cold.
Frank Gehry hopes Sydney-siders will warm to his bold addition to the city's skyline. Adrian Rochella, ABC News.
And we'll take you back to our top story now, and that is the fact that Adam Giles has been stripped of his role as Northern Territory Chief Minister. His office has confirmed this news. The member for Catherine Willem Westra Van Holth is the new Chief Minister after winning the leadership challenge 8 votes to 6. John Elferink is the new deputy. Mr Giles secured the Northern Territory's top job in March in 2013 after wresting the leadership from Terry Mills, who swept the Country Liberals into office in August 2012 after 11 years in opposition. Australia has continued its strong preparation for this month's World Cup with a win against England in the one-day Tri-Series final at the WACA ground. But the victory may have come at a cost, with James Faulkner forced to leave the field with a side strain, putting his World Cup in doubt. The all-rounder displayed his importance to the Australian side before he was injured with a brilliant 50 off just 24 deliveries.
I think the thought for any of us being ruled out so late with an injury, I think even if it's nothing, just the thought of that, I think would hurt a lot of people. I know a few of us are out there hurting for him.
Glenn Maxwell was named man of the match after top scoring with 95 and taking 4 for 46. His performance helped guide Australia to a 112-run victory. Novak Djokovic is celebrating his 5th Australian Open win after a sometimes bizarre match against Andy Murray last night. Djokovic prevailed in 4 sets, but he's faced accusations of faking an injury to gain an advantage.
Novak Djokovic attracted plenty of onlookers as he reacquainted himself with the Norman Brooks Challenge Cup. Since professionals were first allowed to compete in the Australian Open, no man has won the trophy more times.
I still have a juice in my legs, so hopefully I'll be able to win a couple more Grand Slams.
Djokovic's legs have become a key talking point in the wake of his win over Scotsman Andy Murray. Once in the second set and again in the third, the world #1 appeared a broken man.
He can barely stand up right now. He looks like a newborn horse.
But each time he promptly fought back. Djokovic's revival had the opposite effect on Murray, whose game began to unravel.
Jim, it's like Andy's booked into Dr. Murray for a session here, isn't it?
I let that distract me a little bit. That's what I'm most disappointed about.
Djokovic won 12 of the last 13 games to win the match in 4 sets. After the match, Djokovic said his problems were due to exhaustion, but some have accused him of foxing.
I said what I needed to say on my press conference yesterday, and if I satisfied their needs of knowing what was going on, good. If I didn't, I'm sorry about that.
The Serb has now equalled Ivan Lendl and Andre Agassi's record of 8 Grand Slam titles. His next challenge will be in Paris, where he'll chase his maiden French Open win. Damien McIver, ABC News.
Let's go back to the Northern Territory now, where the Chief Minister, Adam Giles, has been stripped of his leadership. I'm joined on the phone now by reporter Alyssa Betts. Alyssa, can you tell us what's happened in the last little while?
It's only been very fresh. In the last half an hour or so, news has started leaking out to various journalists across Darwin that Chief Minister Adam Giles is Chief Minister no longer. There were rumbles last week that the numbers were being counted. We reported exclusively today that in fact that they had gotten to the point where they were willing, or they had the numbers to roll him, but or were close to having the numbers to roll him, but were a little bit worried about the effect on the 2016 election, which happens halfway through the year. But yes, as I say, half an hour ago, news started leaking out that he's gone, that the newly installed Deputy Chief Minister, Peter Chandler, he's also gone. He'd only been installed, I think, late November, early December. And in his place, a new deputy will rise, John Elfrink, who has himself had his eye on the top job but has never had the numbers to be able to do so. The new Chief Minister, as we understand, is Willem Westervan Holter. He is the member for Catherine, and it's as I say, all very fresh. We're still trying to figure out exactly what happened. It's understood the votes were 8-6 in favour of a new Chief Minister. And there's some fairly surprising names that we understand through their support behind rolling Adam Giles. Adam Giles is known for his combative leadership style, and it's understood that some of his colleagues had become frustrated in recent times. But yes, it's taken everyone a bit by surprise this late at night.
It's very late at night for this kind of news to be trickling through, and as you mentioned, it's very early in the process, and obviously you're all trying to determine exactly what's happened and why that change of heart. Do you have any idea as to why that may have happened earlier? Obviously, speculation whether they'd have the numbers to roll him, then pulling out, and then now this has happened. Do you think do you have any idea why this may have happened?
Well, it's difficult to say. We'll find out a little bit more tomorrow when we start pressing everyone for some reasons. We did have a rather rushed sale of the Territory Insurance Office, which was government-owned, towards the end of last year, and it was understood to cause some concerns within the parliamentary wing. It certainly caused some concerns within the public and about the consultation process that was embarked upon before the TIO was actually sold. Obviously, people were drawing parallels or correlations to what happened with the Queensland government. Just on the weekend, with the votes there, they embarked on sales of assets and plans to lease assets, and that was being copied to some extent here in the Territory. We have plans to, or the Country Liberals government has plans to lease the Darwin port long term as well. So that may well have played into it.
Okay, Elizabeth, thank you so much for explaining that to us at obviously very such short notice, and as you say, we'll find out a lot more when we wake up tomorrow as to what exactly has happened. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
And that is ABC News for now. You can keep up to date with all the news we're following by visiting our website if you'd like any more information on that developing story. Thanks for your company.